May 1945. Germany lies defeated, silent, and unrecognizable. Entire cities have been reduced to jagged ruins, sheets of smoke drift above collapsed streets, and the once mighty Reich has crumbled into dust. Among the rubble stands another kind of wreckage. Millions of teenagers who only months earlier were praised as the hope and future of Nazi Germany. They had worn uniforms, sworn loyalty oaths, marched in perfect formation, carried rifles, manned anti-aircraft guns, and believed with absolute conviction that they were serving a glorious destiny. Now their world has vanished overnight. Their uniforms are worthless, their leaders gone, their ideology shattered. As the war ends, these young people face a terrifying question. What happens to a generation built for a Reich that no longer exists? To understand their fate, we must go back to the beginning, long before the bombs fell and Berlin was encircled. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in January 1933, the Hitler Youth was a small and fragmented organization with fewer than 100,000 members. It was far from the universal movement it would later become. But Hitler and the Nazi leadership understood something critical. Controlling the youth meant controlling the future. They believed that if they could shape children, shape their minds, bodies, loyalties, and dreams, they could ensure that Nazism survived for generations. This vision transformed the Hitler Youth from a minor organization into the most powerful youth movement in German history. The architect of this transformation was Baldur von Schirach, appointed Reich Youth leader in 1931. Charismatic and completely devoted to Hitler, Schirach believed that children should belong first and foremost to the Führer. He expanded the organization aggressively, taking control of sports clubs, scouting groups, after-school programs, and any space where young people gathered. By 1936, the Nazis solidified this control with the law on the Hitler Youth, declaring that every Aryan boy and girl had a duty to join. 3 years later, participation was made compulsory by law. Families could be punished if their children refused. Overnight, childhood in Germany was no longer a private or family matter. It belonged to the state. Boys aged 10 to 14 entered the Deutsches Jungvolk, where they learned basic drills, camping skills, marching songs, and early nationalist ideology. At 14, they graduated into the Hitlerjugend, which emphasized endurance, military-style discipline, marksmanship, and unquestioning obedience. Girls joined the League of German Girls, the Bund Deutscher Mädel, where physical fitness, community service, homemaking, and nursing were framed as patriotic duties. Whether male or female, every child learned the same core message. Their identity was tied to the Reich, their worth measured by their loyalty to Hitler. On the surface, many of the activities looked like typical youth programs, hikes, competitions, camping trips, but every one of these experiences was infused with ideology. Songs praised sacrifice. Games encouraged aggression. Ceremonies strengthened group identity. Lessons taught racial superiority, anti-Semitism, and devotion to the Führer. Slowly, childhood itself dissolved into militarized nationalism. Peer pressure reinforced loyalty. Dissent was punished socially, if not officially. Parents who opposed Nazism often lived in fear of their own children reporting them. In a totalitarian state, even the family could not compete with the party. When war erupted on September 1, 1939, the Hitler Youth shifted from preparation to participation. At first, the roles were auxiliary. Teenagers served as air raid messengers, fire watchers, and first aid helpers. As German casualties mounted, boys were drafted into anti-aircraft units and trained in specialized branches of the Hitler Youth that fed directly into the armed forces. By 1943, many 17-year-olds were fighting not only in flak batteries defending German cities from Allied bombers, but also on the Eastern Front, where the brutality of combat far surpassed anything their leaders had prepared them for. The most extreme example of this militarization was the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend. Formed in 1943 largely from volunteers born in 1926. Trained by hardened SS officers, these boys entered battle in Normandy in June 1944. Allied soldiers noted their unwavering discipline and terrifying willingness to fight to the death. Their youth made them fearless, but also vulnerable. They suffered catastrophic losses, an entire generation cut down in a matter of weeks. As the war turned decisively against Germany, Hitler called upon his youngest followers once more. In autumn 1944, thousands of boys, some little more than children, were conscripted into the Volkssturm, the desperate last-ditch militia formed when Germany was already collapsing. Armed with Panzerfausts and little more than propaganda-fueled courage, they manned roadblocks, defended bridges, and fought seasoned Allied troops. In Berlin, during the final days of April 1945, Hitler Youth detachments, including groups of boys as young as 12, fought Soviet tanks in the streets. Some surrendered immediately. Others, after years of indoctrination, fought until they were killed. Their short lives were sacrificed for a regime in its last breath. When the Reich finally fell, the Hitler Youth dissolved instantly. Uniforms were hidden or burned. Badges were buried. Leaders fled, committed suicide, or were captured. Artur Axmann, who succeeded Schirach in 1940, tried to escape through the Berlin subway tunnels before being captured in 1946. Baldur von Schirach had been arrested months earlier. Historians still debate the moral responsibility of the teenagers who served. Many had been coerced. Membership after 1939 was mandatory. Others embraced Nazism sincerely after years of conditioning. What is indisputable is that by May 1945, these young people, once molded as the future of Hitler's empire, were left directionless, traumatized, and often orphaned. The Allies immediately recognized the unique psychological challenge presented by this generation. Never before had a modern state indoctrinated children so thoroughly. On October 10, 1945, the Allied Control Council officially outlawed the Hitler Youth, declaring it a core institution of the Nazi state. All property was confiscated. All activities were banned. But simply dissolving the organization was not enough. The minds shaped by it posed a deeper problem. In the Western occupation zones, the response focused on re-education rather than punishment. Allied military governments worked to create new youth programs run by churches, local communities, or non-political organizations. American and British youth officers organized summer camps, discussion groups, sports leagues, and cultural exchanges designed to teach cooperation, democracy, and critical thinking. Instead of marching songs, children learned debate. Instead of ideological instruction, they learned tolerance and responsibility. The idea was not to shame them for their past, but to show them alternative ways of living. The Soviet zone took a sharply different path. There, re-education meant communist indoctrination. In 1946, the Freie Deutsche Jugend, the FDJ, was established as the only state-approved youth organization. Thousands of former Hitler Youth members joined, not because they believed in communism, but because joining was expected. Many traded one form of authoritarian loyalty for another. Rallies, uniforms, flag ceremonies, and political lectures continued, now wrapped in socialist ideology instead of fascist symbolism. While leaders insisted they were freeing youth from Nazism, they often reproduced the same structures of obedience and state control. As for the adult leaders of the Hitler Youth, their reckoning came in the courtroom. At the Nuremberg trials, Baldur von Schirach was charged with crimes against humanity for his role in spreading Nazi ideology and his involvement in the deportation of Viennese Jews during his time as Gauleiter of Vienna. In 1946, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Artur Axmann was tried later by a German denazification court and sentenced to a few years for membership in a criminal organization. He later claimed he had rejected Nazism, a claim historians question. For the ordinary members, around 8 million of them at the war's end, the process was very different. Many were still teenagers or younger. Many were war orphans. Denazification questionnaires asked about their involvement, but most were classified simply as followers. Western authorities realized that punishing an entire generation was impossible and counterproductive. Instead, they concentrated on rebuilding schools, retraining teachers, and introducing democratic values. As West Germany developed into a new democratic state after 1949, the issue of Hitler Youth guilt faded from public discussion, though it remained deeply personal for those who lived through it. Beneath the surface, the psychological scars endured. Many young Germans described years of confusion and shame. They struggled with the collapse of the belief system that had shaped their earliest memories. They had worshipped a leader who betrayed them, devoted themselves to a regime that used them, and participated, sometimes willingly, sometimes unknowingly, in a criminal system. Learning about the Holocaust and Nazi crimes in the post-war years left many horrified at their own role, however small. For some, silence became a lifelong shield. For others, confronting the past became a moral duty. By the time West Germany was founded in 1949, the generation raised under Nazism had begun the long journey toward normal life. They finished school, found jobs, started families, and tried to build identities separate from the ideology that had once defined them. But the influence of their Hitler Youth years remained a shadow over their adult lives, a reminder of how a government can shape, manipulate, and ultimately betray the minds of its children. Their story is a warning of how easily childhood can be weaponized, how quickly a nation can lose its moral compass, and how long it takes to rebuild when that compass is destroyed. By the early 1950s, Germany was rebuilding itself from the ashes. City by city, family by family, life by life. Streets still carried the scars of bombings, bridges were twisted metal skeletons, and entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. But among the debris walked millions of young men and women who had once worn the uniform of the Hitler Youth. They were older now, no longer the children who had marched with drums and flags, no longer the teenagers who had shouted slogans with pride. And each of them carried the same silent question. What do you do with a past you were taught to worship, when the future demands you bury it? In both East and West Germany, the war had ended, but the moral debris lingered. Former Hitler Youth members found themselves standing at a crossroads they never chose, shaped by an ideology they never fully understood, and judged by a world that often forgot they had been children when it all began. Their world was not one of triumphant soldiers returning home, but of shame, confusion, and a desperate need to blend in, to rebuild, to belong again. And yet, their shared past hung over them like a shadow that stretched from the ruins of Berlin to every classroom, every workplace, every family dinner table. In West Germany, the Allied occupation gradually shifted toward reconstruction. In 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany was established, and with it came the rapid economic revival that would later be known as the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Factories reopened, businesses flourished, and new apartment blocks rose where rubble had once stood. Former Hitler Youth members, most now in their 20s or early 30s, stepped into this new world quietly. They became mechanics, teachers, clerks, engineers, police officers, and lawmakers. They formed new families, built new homes, raised new children. And because nearly everyone of their generation had been forced into the Hitler Youth, once membership became mandatory in 1939, few were singled out or ostracized. Their past, shared by millions, became something few wanted to discuss openly. Teachers who once lectured on loyalty to Hitler now taught mathematics and literature. Civil servants who once stamped documents in Nazi offices now stamped paperwork for the new republic. Some lawmakers in the Bundestag had once stood proudly in Hitler Youth formations, unaware of the horrors their obedience supported. Historians later called those born between 1922 and 1930 the Hitler Youth generation, a group marked not by ideology, but by discipline, routine, and emotional restraint. They grew into adulthood with the same traits the regime had cultivated: order, pragmatism, efficiency. But beneath that surface lay something far more complicated, an internal conflict between what they had believed, what they had witnessed, and what they now knew. Public discussion of the Hitler Youth was almost non-existent in the 1950s and early 1960s. These were years of deliberate forgetting. Many Germans saw themselves as victims of bombings, hunger, displacement, and national collapse. Conversations about complicity or indoctrination were rare, often avoided, sometimes even taboo. Schools treated the topic lightly or abstractly. Families kept silent. Children asked questions. Parents shrugged or changed the subject. Some former Hitler Youth members avoided talking because the memories were too painful. Others avoided talking because they could not reconcile the pride they once felt with the truth they had learned. A few insisted they were too young to have known any better, too naive to understand the violence their organization ultimately served. Only in isolated autobiographies, such as those written by journalist Alphonse Heck or historian Melita Mashman, did the voices of the Hitler Youth generation begin to surface. These works described not monsters or zealots, but children swept into a tide too powerful to resist. They wrote about excitement, belonging, camaraderie, and adventure, precisely the tools that made Nazi indoctrination so effective. Their honesty shocked many readers and challenged the narrative of an entire generation. But silence cannot hold forever. And by the 1960s and 1970s, cracks began to appear. A new generation was coming of age, one that had no memory of the war, no loyalty to old narratives, and no patience for silence. Students staged protests, marched on campuses, demanded transparency, and confronted their parents with blunt questions that previous decades had avoided. What did you do? What did you believe? What did you support? Living rooms became battlegrounds. Dinner tables turned into interrogation rooms. Former Hitler Youth members, now in their 40s, found themselves on trial not in courtrooms but in their own homes. Documentaries emerged. Early historical studies appeared. Memoirs multiplied. And psychologists began describing a shared emotional pattern among the former Hitler Youth. A deep, lifelong knot of denial intertwined with guilt and nostalgia mixed with fear. Some admitted moments of warmth when thinking about the friendships they had made. Others confessed that the thrill of marching in uniform had once made them feel important, valued, seen. But every such memory came paired with shame, a terrible awareness that their youthful loyalty had been manipulated to serve a murderous system. The contradictions defined their generation. As children, they were obedient. As adults, they were haunted. By the 1980s, historians and filmmakers finally began to portray the Hitler Youth not as simple villains or innocent bystanders, but as something more tragic. A generation caught in the machinery of a totalitarian state that had reached into their schools, their sports, their songs, their games, their friendships, even their dreams. The conversation shifted from blaming individuals to understanding systems. How could a society seize the minds of millions of children so completely? How had everyday rituals, campfires, uniforms, sports competitions, badges, been turned into tools of ideological control? And what lessons did this hold for the modern world? These discussions brought both clarity and discomfort, but they also revealed something essential. The Hitler Youth story was not just about the past. It was a warning that stretched forward into the future. By the late 20th century, the legacy of the Hitler Youth had become a global symbol, proof of how powerful, seductive, and dangerous ideological indoctrination can be when it targets the young. What began as a youth organization ended as one of the clearest warnings in modern history. Official memory in Germany changed slowly. While the first academic studies appeared in the 1960s, only in the 1980s and 1990s did schools begin teaching the subject in depth. Students demanded answers. Teachers began opening archives. Universities hosted conferences discussing how early indoctrination shaped adulthood, political beliefs, and democratic values. Former Hitler Youth members participated in interviews, finally breaking decades of silence. Their testimonies spoke not of ideological commitment, but of the heavy burden of manipulation, how guilt, silence, and discipline lingered long after the uniforms were gone. After reunification in 1990, historians compared how East and West Germany had handled their Hitler Youth past. The findings were unsettling. Despite opposite political ideologies, both states used similar methods to shape their youth: uniforms, songs, slogans, and loyalty rituals. The labels were different, socialist instead of nationalist, but the structure was disturbingly familiar. It revealed a universal truth about totalitarian systems. Controlling the future requires shaping the young. Today, the Hitler Youth remains banned in Germany, and its symbols are prohibited under Section 86 of the German Criminal Code. Yet its imagery survives in museums, films, historical exhibits, and academic debate. Scholars still argue whether the psychological influence of Hitler Youth training disappeared after the 1970s, or if it continued shaping post-war attitudes toward authority, conformity, and civic responsibility. The truth lies somewhere between forgetting and remembering, between the silence of the 1950s and the confessions of the 1990s. Internationally, educators use the Hitler Youth as a case study in how propaganda works. Exhibits at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Documentation Center in Nuremberg show how peer pressure, rewards, fear, and ritual can shape young minds. They illustrate how easily belonging can become obedience, and how quickly obedience can become something far more dangerous. And for many visitors, the most unsettling question is not why the Hitler Youth existed. It is how easily something like it could happen again. In the end, the story of the Hitler Youth is not simply about an organization collapsing in 1945. It is about a generation trying to rebuild itself from its own past. It is about how children can be shaped by forces they cannot escape. And it is about the long, difficult journey from indoctrination to self-reflection. Their lessons remain powerful today. Indoctrination does not end when a regime falls. It lingers, in memory, in silence, in shame, and in the resilience of those who must learn to question what they were once taught to obey. The uniforms are gone, but the warning remains. Whenever obedience replaces thought and ideology replaces childhood, rebuilding begins not with new laws, but with the courage to question everything. And if you found this story insightful, your journey isn't over. Discover the darker counterpart to this tale in What Happened to the Gestapo After WW2, where another pillar of Nazi power faces its long-awaited reckoning.